hello everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of ClueCon Weekly. Joining us this week is Clint Smith, an alumni of the MySQL management team and a startup and open source consultant. Thank you for joining us today, Clint.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Luca.
So I know you have a very long history with open source and software in general. So could you give us a quick introduction about yourself first?
Yeah. Starting at the very beginning, I was the son of a U.S. diplomat. I grew up all over the world. I was born in Spain, and I've lived in Mexico, Peru, Romania, Australia. And so while I'm based now in Silicon Valley, I very much think of myself as someone who brings a global perspective to tech issues and tech policy issues. I've spent 10 years in Washington, D.C., working on tech issues, and 20 years now in Silicon Valley.
Nice. Well, yeah, that's a very, very nice start and something that, it's always good to have a global perspective on software and open source and what. So I think you said you started, so you've been part of MySQL. When did you become aware of open source software? Like when did your journey in open source start?
Yeah, meeting the team at MySQL fundamentally changed how I think about technology and also intellectual property. So I had been leading the legal department at Macromedia. You might remember Macromedia.
Oh,
Flash,
yeah, definitely.
And maybe you built something with Shockwave or Director, but we were a proprietary software company. And an essential part of my job was locking down our IP, protecting our IP. And we only shipped executables, and we guarded our source code in a fortress. And then I joined MySQL, and my world was turned upside down, and I was educated by some very forward-thinking founders and members of the management team who taught me that open source is a better way to develop software, and open source is a powerful way to build a strong business. I'll share one example. Might have been my second week at the company, and I'd gone from proprietary Macromedia to open source MySQL. And I stumbled upon a part of our webpage where the founders had put all of the features that we're going to put into the next release. And then they had the name and email address of the lead engineer for those features. And I panicked. I went to the founders and I said, this is terrible. Like, I was just in a management team meeting where we were talking about how essential it was to improve the query optimizer. I go to the website and there's Igor's name and email address, and Larry Ellison could just hire Igor for €1 million a year and we're doomed. And they looked at me and they were like, no, like, first, Igor would never work for Larry Ellison. Second, our team is committed to this project. And third, by publishing what we plan to build and publishing the email addresses, we're going to invite input, contribution, and build trust in this project and the stewardship of this project and the roadmap for this project. And the benefits of publishing the features and the names of the engineers far outweigh any risk that Larry Ellison is somehow going to impede us by hiring these people. And I had to think about it for about 24 hours. And I started to realize this is a different way of thinking, but this is a powerful way of thinking, of building trust with the community, publishing a roadmap, inviting contributions, inviting perspective on what we should build and how we should build it. Very powerful.
Well, they still had something to do with Larry Ellison in the end. So
eventually, yes, but I would have to say, Oracle has been a good custodian of the MySQL.
It did happen. So before we go down that route, there's one thing. I think Macromedia at some point did make something open source. The base Flash standard is open source at this point, right? I don't even know if something like that happened though.
Yeah, there was discussion around making the Flash player, the client, open source so that more people could build applications for it. We decided fundamentally not to do that. And so that was an example of where, we thought about having an open source approach to that. And we remain technology proprietary.
Oh, nice. So I think then it was something like reverse engineered, because at some point there still is, like, the only surviving open source Flash player, actually the only surviving Flash player is actually open source. If you really need to play Flash, there's
yes, you can certainly do a clean room implementation, look at the specs and rebuild.
Oh, I thought that open source the protocol. So yeah, that's interesting. Well, I mean, MySQL was probably the first or second big and successful open source company. Others that come to mind are Red Hat for sure, and there's a few others. So you were there at the early stage. So I'm really interested to know what you think made MySQL be successful in a world where many other open source companies got started at the same time, and not all of them got where they got.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an excellent Harvard Business School case study on the story of MySQL and tying it to Clayton Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma about how a simpler technology that may be lower cost or easier to adopt can disrupt a complicated technology. I remember when I was there, Oracle 13G database came out and they proudly proclaimed they had more than 800 new features. And that's terrifying for a DBA that you're going to have to master 800 new features in the new iteration of the database. And MySQL was simpler and cheaper. And so I do think the innovator's dilemma and the entrant of a lower cost, simpler product technology was one of the learnings. One of the learnings that isn't in the Harvard Business School study that I would highlight to people, and I do this when I go to business school classes, is the power of distribution. So, MySQL may not have been the best open source relational database. I have many friends in the Postgres community who will argue late into the night that Postgres
all day.
But putting that debate aside, we had the power of being part of the Linux distribution. And so, any Linux developer, anyone who is using, Linux or PHP would basically receive the MySQL database as part of their Linux distro. And so when you needed to write to a database, the database that was there was MySQL. And so very powerful for open source projects and communities to think about how will you get your distribution? And it may not be today, a formal software bundle, but it may be an adjacent technology. So when I worked with DataStax, the Apache Cassandra company, we often collaborated with the Apache Kafka people because companies running Cassandra almost always run Kafka as well, and the technologies work very nicely together. So finding that distribution for your product is absolutely essential because developers won't just discover it. The second thing we did at MySQL as one of the very first companies to do this was to have an enterprise subscription for our product. And the key to that was really having your customers understand what was going into the open core, what features would go into the open core, what features would be reserved for the enterprise product, and exactly what the philosophy was or the strategy was behind the distinction. You really can't surprise your open source community or your paying customers by having a lack of clarity over what goes into the open core and what is reserved for paying customers. And we actually had a few principles going into that, and so people could predict when a given feature was considered, whether it be in the open source community or whether that would be reserved for enterprises who paid for the enterprise subscription. But we were very proud of launching and growing that enterprise subscription business to $100 million before selling the company.
Yeah, that's another thing I think was very good for MySQL as a beginning developer. Like right when you joined MySQL, I had just graduated and I was working for Accenture as a consultant. I did that for 4 years because before I moved into something that was less stressful, to be fair. And the fact that MySQL got associated with the growth of PHP as a programming language really gave it a boost. Like from 0 to 100, I was just seeing every package was using MySQL. Nobody else was using anything else. I think that's another solid starting point for me. Getting associated with a successful language or environment will do a lot.
Yes, PHP was essential to our growth and success. But you point to another point, which was PHP was easy to learn, and MySQL was easy to work with. So we would have a design principle that you ought to be able to get your database installed and operational within 5 minutes. And we'd constantly test that. What was the developer experience over the first 5-10 minutes? Can they get up and running without any pain? And I think the successful companies find a way to really make that initial developer journey as positive and frictionless as possible. I point out a great company like MongoDB. which has done that for especially scripting developers who need to write to a database. Nothing easier than writing to MongoDB.
Yeah. Or Redis as a storage, as key value storage. Redis just runs, like you install it and it's working. MySQL, you install it and it's working. You need to do anything. In fact, I will wager that the friends of Postgres did take some examples out of the MySQL playbook at the time, because at the time running Postgres was not as easy. I think that's fair to say. Nobody will get offended. It's a very good point.
Yeah, another learning from MySQL that was very powerful for me was that everybody who used the database was considered a customer. Some customers would pay us with money. Other customers would just build a new application using our database, and we would be proud that they were successful on the open source version. We would be thankful if they talked about it at a meetup. We would be, overjoyed if they submitted some bugs. We would welcome them to and committers. Maybe they would publish our documentation into their local language. But the mindset of the founders and of the company that I thought was very powerful was that anybody who took the time to learn and use our technology was a customer providing us value. And only some of them provided us value in the form of paying an invoice for our enterprise subscription. But there were tens of thousands of others who paid us in so many different ways. And that was a powerful way to build community and to show respect for the community. And the community ultimately was an essential part of our company building.
I feel like there's a lot of good stars there. So with your experience, you've been learning a lot of things from your the companies you work for. So you've been investing in a lot of open source companies. I think it's about 15, right?
Correct.
Or more than 15.
Correct. I love to partner with open source founders, and especially as they go from 2 employees to 100 employees. So if we can get them to 100 employees or 20 million in revenue, they're more expert people who can help them. But at the early stages, I love to help them launch and get started in their business.
When you meet founders, so let's say this is something that comes up very often in general on the program. I've written, that's an hypothesis. I've written a very good open source software of some kind. Does a lot of things. It's very good. It's well documented, etc. I want to make it a business. What are the questions that come up the most, or what actually I think what sometimes happen? What haven't founders thought of when you meet them?
Yeah. So, it often starts with projects that arise from my legal background. So I was trained as a lawyer and have often performed legal work for tech companies. And so it often starts with the legal question of what should my license choice be? Should I have a permissive license like MIT, BSD, Apache 2.0? Should I have a license like GPL or AGPL or the business source license? So and there's not an easy answer there. You really have to spend time with the founder, think about their go-to-market strategy, think about competitors on the landscape, and that's a deep process to think about. For this product, what is the right license approach? Related to that is the governance of the open source project. Are we better off incubating within the Apache Software Foundation, incubating within the Cloud Native Computing Foundation or the Linux Foundation? They're excellent homes for open source projects, but then as a founder, you're giving up some control over the project. And you may want to actually be the custodian or the governance body for your own project. So at MongoDB, the company governs the open source community. And they've done that successfully. But that governance question of, do you want to be part of a larger open source organization where you lose some control but get some visibility and some credibility, or do you want to be the custodian of the project yourself? And that's a key question. And then that leads to a question around brand. So I remember an early dinner in North Carolina. I was seeking mentorship from the Red Hat team, and Red Hat's chief lawyer talked about the importance of that, little red fedora, and the fact that
Mm.
of all the Linux distributions, there was trust. Governments, financial institutions, large enterprises trusted the Red Hat distribution and paid for it because of the brand association with quality and reliability and the leading Linux distribution. And we often talk to founders about how will we protect this brand, and will there be a single brand? Will the name of the company be the same
Mm.
as the name of the open source project, or like with Red Hat and Fedora, do you want to split the two, which has a lot of administrative overhead and some
Mm.
market confusion, but has some benefits as well. So I think being deeply digging into the brand strategy is important at the early stages, because also competitors can fork or clone your software, and there can be a lot of confusion in the market of who is the source of the software for a popular project. The other topics tend to be more go-to-market oriented. I know venture capitalists will often push an open source founder to quickly have a SaaS product, maybe
Mm.
a SaaS product that can be bought by developers without much friction. But there are other business models. There's still a market for on-prem software. There's still a market for embedded software. And so the go-to-market, how will we make money from this open source project is essential. And part of that is partnership. So thinking about, are there small companies with adjacent technologies? I talked about Apache Cassandra and Apache Kafka
Mhm.
working together. Then the two companies behind those projects ought to be working together on go-to-market. And there are also partnerships with bigger companies like a Red Hat or an IBM that need to be considered. And then finally, hiring. It really, does come down to the team in almost all cases. Have you put the right people in the right roles with clarity around what's expected of them? And so the area where I might provide the most value with a founder is thinking through the design of the
Mm.
organization and who to put in what roles. And every year is different in that respect because startups change so fast. So finding the right person for the right role in a given year is really the puzzle to solve with a founder.
So, quick question around licensing. With your legal background, can you just give us a couple examples of what different licenses look like, and what are the benefits of a couple of them? Maybe the most common.
Yeah. Yeah. If a founder really wants, her software adopted as broadly as possible, and in the short term is not worried about monetization or competition, she should choose a permissive and flexible license. The one I like is the Apache Software Foundation 2.0
Oh yeah.
license. But really, there's going to be no friction for any developer in any organization on the planet to adopt and use that software if it's licensed under the Apache 2.0 license. There's no concern about patents. There's no concern about the viral copyleft implications of the license. And so, if all you want is adoption, and the key is to remove friction or barriers to adoption, I love the Apache 2.0 license. If you're worried about competitors, perhaps making a SaaS version of your software, maybe one of the larger public clouds offering your software as a service, then you're better off using a license like the Affero GPL, which prohibits offering software as a service unless the entire code base around the software as a service offering is also made available under the AGPL license. So if you have from the very beginning a concern around others offering a hosted version of your service, or the public cloud standardizing and offering on your software, you really have to be careful not to choose a license like the Apache software license, which is
Mm.
permissive. Choose a license like the AGPL license. And then
Mm.
one I'm not a big fan of, and happy to be on record of this, but the business source license, which was created by my MySQL founders, it's a license where features are proprietary for a certain number of years, and then
Mhm.
features their proprietary basis disappears. So all software eventually becomes open source. Yeah, to me, that's an arbitrary deadline, and it's stronger to say there's certain features that will be proprietary, there are other features that will be
Mm.
open source, and to have a consistency around that framework based upon the functionality of the software rather than an arbitrary time period where a given feature goes from being proprietary and paid to free and open source. So, not a big fan of the business source license, but
Hmm.
happy
So
to meet with
I
people who adopt it.
I have to say, though, that business source license does have one, I would say, philosophical advantage. I remember debating this at the time, back when MySQL was starting to become a company. It guarantees that if anything happens to the company backing the project, I know it's open source, so technically it's all out there. If anything happens to the company backing the project, including just getting acquired and the founders, it's happened in the past where founders were acquired for hiring, not for the project. So now I work for insert large company here. I have a $5 million salary, and I don't care about the project anymore. That ensures that eventually those features do make it out in the
Yeah.
field. That's
Yep.
maybe the only good. It's guaranteed that that particular indexing mechanism that's currently closed source will be available in 2 years eventually, and will benefit someone probably. So maybe that, I guess, it's a good.
Yeah. Um, it's not all bad. So if your biggest concern as a founder when you go into the sales process is customers who fear vendor lock-in, the business source license, you know, obliterates concerns around vendor lock-in. I have to pay you for a certain number of years, and then it'll be open source, and my IT department can self-manage if you're trying to charge me too much. So if your big concern is vendor lock-in, it may be a good license. But I prefer if as a founder you come upon a feature that enterprises will pay for and the open source developers don't need. Wow, it's powerful to have that for 5, 10, 15 years and charge for it rather than have that feature that enterprises pay for and the open source community doesn't need, have that poof disappear
That
into the
is
open source.
certainly protecting investments better, which is also very important. I mean, we're all here to benefit the world, but occasionally we like to also pay the bills. So protecting the investment in the project certainly is a good point too.
Yeah.
And speaking of open source and friendliness of licensing and friendliness of, you work for Discord and you're the executive responsible for safety and security. So first of all, great job. Honestly, as a user, I feel every time I use Discord, I feel like it's very, very secure and never had any issues. So that's from me. But what do you think Discord is doing with open source? Is there releases? There are libraries that you have released, etc. I'm not very familiar with that side of Discord. I've
Yeah.
only used the service, to be fair.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for being a Discord user. We get filled with energy when we meet users around the world who are happy with our product, and often they'll give us, comments about our product. So after this interview, you should send me any product suggestions for what we should build to improve your Discord experience. But Discord loves open source software. Our engineering team, relies heavily on it. We also, as a legal policy, encourage engineers to become committers and contributors to open source projects. We celebrate that. We also look at the technology we build internally, what we can make open source. And one that I'm very proud of as the executive responsible for online safety, we came up with a semantic hashing technology that will help detect new forms of child sexual abuse material. And rather than keep this as our proprietary technology, we went to an industry group called the Technology Coalition, and we contributed this semantic hashing technology so that other companies can use it to detect this, terrible material that might be shared on their platform. And that's an example for us where in a field like online safety, open source is very powerful because there's no competitive advantage in online safety. If we can come up with an innovation and share it with, Reddit and Twitch and Meta, the overall internet becomes safer. And likewise, if someone at Meta comes up with excellent technology, we would hope that they would share it with platforms like Discord so that we can improve our safety practices. So I think open source has a very strong connection to the work of online safety. And as we innovate in online safety, we have a moral imperative to make those technical innovations available under an open source license to other companies.
Especially given how AI and the rise of AI generated content is not leading to all good results, let's say, because it's a tool, so it's out there, especially the open source stuff, which again, it's there because people have a need to experiment. But then you can there is so some online safety tools are going to be very, very important in the future. It's kind of like the guardrails for again, for AI, for any LLM will need guardrails for input and output. There's a lot there that's going to be new, and that's going to be a key tool, frankly, for people to be able to publish, even to be able to publish safely. Publish, I don't know, an open source LLM or whatever, knowing that it won't be used for something that will make the FBI come say hello. And it's not even your fault. It's I think it's the first time, like, it's very hard to use other types of open source software, like, again, MySQL or even FreeSwitch, our telephony platform, is very hard to use it for something that's directly criminal. Or rather, you could make a case where you couldn't do anything about it. AI is a bit different. So I think there's going to be a lot of work to do on that, on the semantics of content that's being generated. So
yes,
that's just a start.
And I think very good work is being done. We have a partnership with Midjourney. It's one of the most popular communities on Discord today, and it's wonderful to see our engineers working with Midjourney engineers to make sure that the images generated meet a responsible standard and meet our community guidelines, which prohibit many types of images that people find objectionable.
Good. So, as we approach the end of our time, do you have any closing remarks on anything, any recommendations you'd like to give to people? It's something I really like to ask guests. Like, I'm starting out in open source. What do I need to know?
Luca, what I have learned since my time at MySQL is the very best people, the very best minds are drawn to open source software. And I think it's because working in open source software provides more meaning to your life. And I'll share maybe a parable. If you can imagine, someone finishing their university degree in economics and having two life paths. And one life path would be go to be a financial advisor to a wealthy family. And you could work for the wealthy family for 30 years and grow their assets from 100 million to billions of dollars, and the family would be very grateful, and you would make a nice living, and maybe you'd have some sustainable investments and a diversified portfolio, and you'd get to 60 years old and you would have had a very pleasant life, and the family would be grateful that you've generated more wealth for their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The alternative is you go become a university professor, and you publish your data sets, you publish your journals, you have webinars and classes, and you train people who also become academics. And when you turn 60, you have a body of work that's available to the public, available to humanity, available to billions of students around the world who have online connectivity. Your work is there. And I think of those two 60-year-old people, and I know that the one who took the professor path, making their work available to the world, is going to be more fulfilled. And I think that's why the people who come to open source, who have the courage to share their code in a repository every night with the world, the people who take feedback on the code, the people who mentor others, encourage them to become contributors and committers, these to me are some of the most inspirational people. And it's why I love continuing to work with open source founders and their teams, because special people who want to have an impact on the world are drawn to open source projects and open source companies. And it's an honor to work with them, and they inspire me in every project they launch and in every company they build.
It does take a special kind of self-confidence to be able to face an open GitHub repository with pull requests and issues and people saying, this doesn't work, or give me this for free, or it is a...
And it reminds me of the courage of a professor, having to give a lecture, having to, publish a paper for peer review. it takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there like that. And
Yeah,
but
that's wrong.
it's also very fulfilling, very fulfilling.
Yeah, so I think it's a very good path. I've been part of a few large small open source projects, and always
Right.
been a pleasure. And as always, as an engineer, never dealt much with communities at the time, but it's always been a very fulfilling journey. And I think the whole idea about ClueCon and ClueCon Weekly is to help people figure out where we want to go with projects and how to get started. So I thank you so much for your contribution. I mean, there was so many good concepts here, from how to get started, picking license, approaching becoming a company. It's really a lot of content. So thank you very much, Clint, for joining us today.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you for having me on ClueCon, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Yeah, maybe we can do another. Maybe we could do another episode or two about maybe going more specifically into licensing, or the SaaS versus on-prem model, etc. Which is probably the choice that a company's faced first when getting started. More, as you said, than hiring. Hiring usually at the start is, I need more engineers.
Mm,
So that's the first step. Then you start thinking about few others. But it's when it's me and a friend, it's usually we need more engineers so we have more fingers going on. But there's a few topics there we could pick up again. So thank you for offering it, and we'll certainly take you up on that. So
excellent.
again, thank you very much, Clint Smith, for joining us today. And well, for the rest of the people, I'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Thank you, Luca.